I'm Kelly Lashar, and I'm a therapist at Restore Behavioral Health in Norman. We are a private group counseling practice that sees all different kinds of populations and issues and concerns for children and adults. We see individuals and couples and families. So I'm honored to take part in this discussion with the Pioneer Library System. It's important to us that we can be part of our community. As Restore, we want to really help our community. And so this is a good way for us to be able to do that. I look forward to sharing some of the things that I've been thinking about with you all today. I was thinking about, the question was reframing life after COVID. You know, what now? What do we do now that COVID has lifted? Our isolation and our quarantine has lifted. And it's been a very difficult reentry for many people. And there are lots of things we could talk about. We could have talked about depression or the anxiety related to it. We could talk about phobias that have been created and fears, relationships. The thing I really wanted to focus on most of all for our time together today is about the reentry with connection and how hard it has been to connect with people again after being in 14 months of isolation and all alone. And I think as humans, so much of just the core of who we are is longing to connect with other people and to have relationships. And COVID and our time in isolation during the pandemic really affected that. We can see it in our work relationships, in our families, and just in our desire to go out to the store. A lot of us have really had trouble reintegrating back into society. So today I thought I'd talk about how, now that we've ended our isolation, how do we find connection again? You know, COVID brought so many just awful things into our lives. Many of us had people that we know passed away from the illness or who had it and were very sick. We know people that have lost businesses, lost savings, students who lost opportunities to do internships, or people that lost chances to have their weddings in person or their loved ones' funerals. And just so much has happened. We've had caregivers that didn't intend to be teachers and that wasn't their plan. And then they were home all year with little ones and trying to be teachers. We had teachers that were trying to adjust to being online teachers and individual tutors. And it was just really hard for so many people. But it's this time now that we say, what now? Now that that time has lifted and we've been given permission to go back, what now? How do we do that? So I had this image of imagining ourselves in a picture frame, a picture of you before COVID. What did you look like? What did you like to do? What did your day look like? Were you busy? What kind of activities did you do? Were you rushing? Who was in your life? Did you have boundaries? Did you have frustrations? What did you look like before COVID? And then imagining what we look like now. You know, what has changed? Is there anything different? There was a study that the Pew Research did that said many people commented that there were positive aspects of the isolation and also negative aspects. And a lot of us have experienced that even on our own, in our own lives. The negative aspects I just talked about, some of them are life-changing and were very devastating. But many of us actually also found some positives in this time. So I think as we look at reframing COVID and what now, what do we look like now in that frame? We ask ourselves, you know, what do we want to bring? What do we want to bring with us from that time? What do we learn? What do we not want to have that we had before? You know, what kind of things and lessons did we learn? So that's kind of what I thought I'd talk about today. How do we take this horrible time that we've just come out of and make it into something that brings a connection and brings an improvement in our lives? I'm not sure when the library system returned back to work full time, but I'm certain that even coming back with your coworkers, it was difficult. You know, we've not been used to talking to people. We've not been used to, you know, wearing pants with waistbands and driving to work and sitting at a desk and talking to someone. We've been able to do Zoom meetings and shut the computer when we're done and choose to talk or not talk. And so I think now that we're looking at this thinking, let's step back out. Connections are so important. And when we have a lack of connection, that can lead to many things. anxiety, depression, adjustment issues, fears, social anxieties, phobias, being scared to go out, agoraphobia, just being scared to even leave the house. So without connections, we can actually get into quite a hole. This year, a scientist in Florida, in Coral Gables, Florida, has actually given this a name. He's called it the cave syndrome. That during COVID, we were all in a cave. Some might call it COVID anxiety syndrome. It's not a real diagnosable condition, but it's something that scientists and doctors have recognized and therapists have seen that this period of isolation has actually caused something to change in us. And much of the research shows that it will possibly be even a PTSD type response for many people. And these mental health concerns that have come from this period of time will linger. And so this idea of cave syndrome means we actually adjusted to the period of quarantine. We actually came to a place where we said, okay, I have learned how to become attached, not to the virus, of course, but to all the things I had to do, staying home. I've become attached to being afraid. I've been attached to how it's affected my daily life. And so the cave syndrome is actually saying, no longer do I have the fear of missing out. The doctor says now he calls it the fear of going out. So how humans can now feel like I'm afraid to go out. It's just very interesting to me. And so we've adapted to being isolated, and our new normal is going to have to come. But what do we want it to look like? We can have lots of excuses for staying home. And I'm certain a lot of us listening to this probably were really happy to be able to say, I can't go to that party. I can't see you then. I can't be at that meeting. Because if we're being honest, we do often like to kind of shell up and be alone. But if we're not careful, we'll stay there and we'll miss the benefits of connection. Some things that we happened when we were alone. We learned how to wear a mask. We learned that we had to social distance. When all of this started, I can remember the first days we were able to get out in our front yard. We could walk down the street with ourselves and our dog and our mask, and our neighbors were across the street, and all we could do was wave 200 feet away. As we got out more and more, we were able to wear our mask in community, but we had to stay far apart. Many of us didn't even want to do that. I'm noticing now that we're out and we're not required to wear masks, we're actually kind of still wanting to wear masks in some degree. Look away quickly, walk away, don't make contact. So this idea of we even still have maybe invisible mask on that I'd like us to try to consider and remove. It's very hard to break a habit once we've formed it. So we've been in this pattern of fear, of anxiety, of protection. It's very hard to break that. And breaking that and coming back into society is vulnerable. It's us saying, we're coming back out. Many of us had troubles even connecting before. So after a year of being alone, what does that look like? The social awkwardness is even greater. I've seen it in people with personalities that are extroverted that get their energy from other people. I've even had extroverts in our practice say it's been really hard to go back. They've developed some social anxieties with being in groups that they never would have had before. So there's a lot of this disconnect happening, not just in people that originally had issues connecting, but in all people. There's a difference too between the risk that we know is there now and the risk that we fear is there. And a lot of us are keeping all of that is keeping us back. I think we find it easy to focus on the risk of the infection, which is what we did all those years, all those months in isolation. But we didn't really recognize the damage it was doing to us feeling lonely and disconnected. Scientists at Caltech actually have been conducting a study on mice in isolation. There's a whole science of isolation that's been happening for years. It's not because of COVID, but COVID does actually help us see it in action. They actually put mice in seclusion, in isolation, all by themselves, and then introduced stressors to them. Isolation caused trauma to these mice. Isolation actually can cause that primal fear of, I'm alone, I'm afraid, what do I do? And it increases anxiety, it increases the adrenaline, the whole stress response happens. And so the same thing that they're seeing in animals happens in humans. There's studies of people that have been on in Antarctica, scientists that have been there for over 14 months. We see the same issue with scientists that are on the space station, cancer patients, people who are immunocompromised, elderly, people who are homebound. People who have this social isolation where they're not able to be with people, their bodies are actually responding to it in a way that is fear. And this whole primal response of I'm afraid, I don't want to go out, it actually shows some changes in the brain, and chemical structures in the body are changing when people are isolated. There's a show on right now called Alone. It's on the History Channel, and part of the whole concept of Alone is they drop someone onto a secluded place. There's a team of 10. They're all by themselves though. Whoever can make it the longest in this isolated, rigid condition wins. The trick is they're alone, they're isolated. And most people, when they start that show, they say, this won't be bad at all. I'm a naturalist survivor. I can make food out of trees. I can build boats from sticks. They know everything. They know how to fight bears. On this show, once there was someone who killed a muskox with his hands. And these people have all the skills necessary to survive in the wild, but what gets them is their isolation. And many of them have had to come home because they say, I did not realize how much I needed people, how much I needed people. We see that even in the movie Castaway, if you guys remember that. He had a volleyball that he drew a face on and he called it Wilson, because even being alone, he made something that felt like social connection. So I think that's what we're all coming out of this time. We're coming out of this primal fear. Part of my practice too with couples involves a theory called emotionally focused therapy. And the creator of emotionally focused therapy talks about us being created for connections. She actually said isolation and the potential loss of loving connection is coded by our human brain into a primal panic response. So if you consider that we lived in a primal panic response for many months, that can naturally turn into anxiety, concerns, depression. Our body can only take so long of living in that high level of fight, flight, or freeze before it actually does respond chemically to that. So thinking about this, thinking about isolation, thinking about emotional connection being crucial to healing. Now that we are trying to heal, an important component of that healing will be coming back, finding emotional connection. The best predictor of surviving any traumatic response, Sue Johnson says, is actually how we seek and take comfort from others. If our pain can find a relational home, we can find healing. We can begin to find healing. It's when we keep it inside, when we continue to hide, when we stay in the cave, that we continue to spiral down. And so I would encourage all of us to find that connection and find that reentry. It's important for our healing that we collectively seek to return. The American Psychological Association did a study a couple months ago. They said 48% of people who are wanting to go back now are actually anxious about going back. They're uneasy about adjusting to in-person interaction. They asked the same question to people who are fully vaccinated, and it was 48%. So almost half of the people fully vaccinated still report, I am uneasy or feel uncomfortable going back to life as I did before the pandemic. Now, sometimes it is related to fear of our health, but I'm thinking if the same number of people that are vaccinated say that as the people that are not vaccinated or just the general public, then it must be more than that. There must be a fear deeper than just the virus for us now. It's the fear of learning how to connect and re-enter again. It's like we're returning back to socialization, like we're coming back to a town that we used to live in, and we're figuring out now how to do it. You know, will I have friends? Will I feel weird? Will I say things that are weird? Do I even have anything else to say? Do I have anything out there still that I want to do? These are all questions, almost existential type questions that we're asking ourselves. And the answer, though, I would say, encourage you, is not to don't go out. It's to go out, lean into it. Judith Beck from the Beck Institute actually said, this time of isolation has been really good, even for introverted people, as they have learned how to make connections, maybe via internet or via Zoom calls and things like that. So even introverted people, let's take that kind of natural feeling of comfort that we had, even connecting over a screen, and let's step out into the real world and try to make that connection with someone right next to us. It's hard, but it will be rewarding. I asked a question to my Facebook group, actually, and what are some issues that you've had in returning? I had several comments that were positive, negative, angry, Within about 6 comments, I had the arguing that happens with people because our reentry doesn't just involve our personalities, it also involves the beliefs of the people around us. Some people think it was all a conspiracy. Some people think it was real. Some people think masks were good. Some people think masks were bad. Some people think it's religious based. Some people think it's not. Some people think it's political. Some people think it's not. We have these two gigantic camps and this giant chasm between all of us. And I think as we learn to respect each other going out, we can re-enter, and we can re-enter in kindness, and we can re-enter in love and connection. One person on my Facebook comment said, it's like waiting for the other shoe to drop. If I'm going out in public, I'm worrying, is the other shoe going to drop? Whether it's relationships, disease, financial despair, some sort of other ecological issue, what is going to happen? Is the other shoe going to drop? I heard that from a couple of people. Someone else said it's almost overwhelming to go outside. It's like overstimulating. We've been quiet and we've been calm and simple, and now it's overstimulating, almost too much. That she said, I have to remind myself that it's okay to leave, but it's hard. Someone else said they actually felt comforted by this time because before COVID, they had a lot of anxiety and they didn't feel like people understood it. And now, with this collective anxiety that our entire community and world has felt, we can understand each other at a new level. Maybe an extrovert can understand a person who's afraid to go out, who's afraid to go to a party, or who calls and cancels because now they feel a little bit like that. So our collective experience has actually caused us to have some sort of compassion that we may not have had before. I had someone else say they struggled that they weren't afraid to go out and they were feeling judged that they weren't afraid. So all kinds of things are causing us fear to go back out. Another thing that was interesting is people note the relationship issue. Like I said a minute ago, the two sides that we're on, they've caused so many divisions in people. And so some of us are afraid to go out because we don't know if we're going to be accepted or if we're going to be rejected. Are people mad at us? How do we keep our communities and our friendships safe? That's some of the reason. I had someone that made a comment as far as that she wanted to even leave and move to the country because everyone had been so hateful. And someone else commented to her and said, your hateful comments are why I am afraid to re-enter. So we're all afraid to do this. We're all afraid to get back into life. So how do we re-enter? About re-entry, it made me think about the space shuttle. When the space shuttle re-enters, it has a heat shield. There's a certain angle it has to take. We've seen the tragedy before when a shuttle has entered back into the atmosphere and is completely burned up because of a small vulnerability in the heat shield. But in order for that shuttle to come back to Earth, it has to re-enter. It was designed to re-enter. It was protected for re-entry. There are things that it is prepared to do as it re-enters. And so I think it's okay for us to imagine that's us. We are re-entering into something. And it's okay that we're afraid. It's okay that we feel we need to prepare for it. It's okay that we are worried, is the other shoe going to drop? It's possible that something else bad might happen, but it's also possible that it won't. And so I think we radically accept, let's move forward and let's try this re-entry. Priya Parker wrote a book called The Art of Gathering. It's been out for a couple of years now. And her whole practice is talking about how do we make meaningful gatherings when we're together? What do we do to make our time together be special? And she commented on this time apart, and she said, it's like our social muscles have atrophied. Like we don't even know what to do. How do we even do it? How do we even speak to people? It's like if I say I had trouble before COVID, how in the world will I remember how to connect now? I couldn't even do it before. Rejoining is much like that re-entry. Think about that. As we enter back into life, things are going to hurt. It's going to feel anxious. And it's not illogical or irrational to be anxious. There really are scary things that have happened, and there really are fears. And to be able to say, I validate my fears. I validate that I am not sure how I'm going to react with people. I validate that I feel kind of awkward going up to that person. I validate that I'm afraid. Is that person mad at me that I still have a mask on? I validate that I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'll catch the virus still. Whatever it is, validate that about yourself and say, you know what? I validate that. I observe that I'm anxious. I observe that I'm nervous, but that's okay. It's okay that I feel that way. Of course, I feel that way. Look what we've just been through. But I'm going to radically accept I feel that way. And this is the reality. And I'm going to take a committed action forward, which for you might just mean I'm going to go to the store instead of getting it online. What if we went to the store as reentry and we said, I'm going to practice my social muscles by walking into a store and finding 3 people and saying hi? Not difficult, not a lot of conversation, don't have to linger. Just practice my social muscles by saying hi to someone. One of the commenters on my Facebook page said, and I will read it because it was actually moving what she said and very sad. She said, I know behind those masks we are or were wearing, people seem very distant from each other. Hardly anyone speaks or spoke, but they stared as they'd walk by like they were all in a hurry. The friendliness of people is totally different now, in my opinion. And she said, it truly reminds me of the time after my husband died. It's almost like an abandonment of people and friendships, even though they are still there. And she said, it's really hard to explain. And I think we can notice that. We can walk into a store and not make eye contact with anyone. And it used to not be that way. Another thing about reentry that's important to remember is that we have been isolated. So in order to transition back, we have to be vulnerable, which is scary. And I do think, though, that that vulnerability will lead to our freedom. It'll lead to us making new connections and feeling new peace. We know about exposure therapy that if we're anxious about something, sometimes what we have to do is face that, push through the anxiety, not reducing the anxiety necessarily, but recognizing and validating the anxiety and moving forward, even though we are anxious. And I think at some point, then we can notice there is freedom in returning back. We got used to being alone, we got used to being in the cave. It's probably true that some of you don't even want to be with people. You're in the office and they're just annoying you. And that's okay to recognize that too. To be able to say, I am used to being alone and I like to be quiet. These people are talking too much and they're really stressing me out. It's okay to recognize that, but then reframe it and say, you know what? How can I make a human connection with this person? How can this person enrich my life? How can I enrich theirs? I think we often look at it and we think, I'm maybe the only one that feels this way. Everyone else seems to be adjusting well. I promise you that's not true. People at work, people at school, they are also trying to adjust back to this. You're not alone about it. We are resilient. As a human, you're very resilient. You've done hard things before. You can do this. And as we go back, we're asking these practical questions of, do I wear my mask? Do I go to that party? Do I want my child to go there if they've not been vaccinated? But we're asking also other questions that are more existential, like I said before. Who are my people? How do I want to spend my life? What is truly important in my life? So I think as we think about reframing what we want to look like after this period of isolation and being in the cave and we're re-entering, now we say, what do we want to be part of that re-entry? How do we want to rebuild? What do we want it to look like? We can ease back into the life because I think some people even said being alone felt much like pioneer days. We didn't have to worry about going places. It felt simple. There are things about that simple life that we can keep if we want to. Maintaining our boundaries. If it was okay to say during quarantine, I'm not able to see you now, then it's okay for us to do that now. It really is. Reconnection doesn't mean letting everyone in and doing everything for everybody. Sometimes reconnection means I'm choosing what I want to do with my time. And I'm actually going to choose this group now instead of that group and step away. That's okay. Rethinking our extracurricular activities. Why am I doing this thing? Is this something I want to pull back in? Are my kids too busy? Do I have too many responsibilities? Are there things that I can cut out? What is my aim of doing that? So as I rebuild, as I re-enter and I rebuild, I ask myself that question. What do I want to put back in my life? What kind of daily life do I want for myself? Can we access the life that we created and operated in for years and say, do I want that? Is this an opportunity to reset? Some of us have already gotten back into full-fledged busy chaos, but many of us still have time to say, is this something that I want to bring back into my life? As we reconnect, re-enter, we ask ourselves, what do we want it to look like? What did I learn about myself? What did I learn about others?
Can I find a sense of purpose now that may be different than before? Some practical steps. Don't be passive. Reach out. Actually let yourself be seen. Mask or no mask. I can wear a mask and let people see me by my eyes or my walking to them and talking to them. I can also not see anyone and not have on a mask. So it doesn't really matter if we have a mask or not. It's how we intentionally approach people and let ourselves be seen. The mask just made it easy to not be seen. Ask someone a question. If you're having a hard time reconnecting at work, tell yourself on the way to work, I'm going to ask 3 people this question today. Come up with a question, basic question. It could be, what's the funniest thing you saw happen this week at work? Or what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you as you've worked here? Ask a customer. What's your favorite thing about returning to the library since COVID pandemic is over? Be intentional. And I think as you ask that question to somebody, even if you're afraid to do it, they will feel comforted by you asking. And it might cause this connection back and forth again. Number 2, if you feel safe, it's okay to make yourself go to the store. Find people, 3 people, say hello, push someone's cart back. If you feel safe, go back. Choose to go back even when it's not convenient. I know we've pretty much operated our entire lives via the internet for the last 14 months. Remembering that number 3, that everyone is coming out of isolation. Every one of us, we're all coming out of the cave. You're not alone. If you feel that way, chances are they do too. Don't assume you're the only one at work that feels this way. Maybe you're not the only one that feels socially awkward. Make this collective anxiety can be something that can reconnect us. And then number 4, make a real plan. Don't just say, hey, we have to get together soon. If I want to reconnect with people, I have to make a real plan. So with your coworkers, tomorrow, let's all bring our lunch and let's sit together in the break room. Let's all eat together. Hey, Saturday, let's go listen to music in the park. Like, make a real plan. Being considerate to their fears of reentry as well. And then finally, respect each other's comfort levels and space while returning. If you have a friend that says, I'm really not comfortable doing that right now, that's okay. Maybe reconnect in another way. Make a phone call to them. Humans are made for connection. Even if we think we don't need it, the absence of it shows us that we do. I started at the beginning by saying, if we have a picture frame, what did you look like before then? Maybe you had relationships that weren't healthy. You had activities that were too busy. Maybe you didn't really know what you wanted out of life. Maybe you hadn't done a hobby in a long time. Maybe that's what you look like. And then after COVID, you can reframe it and say, you know what? I've created boundaries. I've figured out what's important in my life. I've reconnected with people that I hadn't seen in a really long time. I have developed new hobbies. There's a lot of things that are good that have happened from it. And so I ask you guys, please, let's find a way to reframe it. Let's let COVID and our time in the cave teach us how special connections are and how much we need them. As a sidebar, just to end, many people are experiencing real mental health conditions that have developed because of this time. If you're someone that is to that point and you feel like, I think something's different than what she's talking about right now, I think I actually am being hindered in my life, and I think it might be a mental health issue, contact a mental health provider in your area. If you feel like you have passed, or you wonder, have I passed to a zone that is more than just the cave syndrome? Am I having such trouble readjusting that now I think it's affected my mental health in a diagnosable way? Then please go visit with someone about that in the medical world. It's very important to take care of your health in that way. There are many great mental health providers in this community, without a doubt. Of course, I'm from Restore Behavioral Health, and we have a large team that is able to meet all of those needs too. But our community is full of people that we work together to make sure that your mental health is okay. And let's don't let COVID change us forever for the bad, but let's reframe and say, how can it change us for the good?